The New York Times media correspondent Michael Grinbaum joins us now. Peter Baker, Michael Feinberg, James Sample are all still here with us. Michael Grinbaum, you reported that in some cases, federal agents actually showed up at the reporters' homes to deliver these subpoenas. What more can you tell us about the subpoenas and how the Times is responding?
This is really an extraordinary escalation, even by the standards of a White House that has made it its business to menace, to threaten, to intimidate the independent news media over the last 18 months. The idea of federal agents showing up at the doorsteps of reporters who are trying to report out the facts about the use of taxpayer dollars on this Air Force One jet for the public is what my colleagues in the newsroom, our lawyer David McCraw, calls a brazen act. The subpoenas specifically were issued actually by Jay Clayton, who you were discussing earlier, the U.S. attorney from Manhattan, who is currently the nominee to become the director of national intelligence. And they seek to compel the reporters to appear before a grand jury in Manhattan on Wednesday morning to, they don't get into too much detail, but essentially to testify about their sources on their reporting about Air Force One. The Times has pledged to fight this in the courts, saying that they believe the government's actions are unlawful. And it's a longstanding principle at our news organization, as Peter, my colleague, can attest, that we will defend our journalists and prevent them from having to disclose sensitive, confidential information at the request of a government that we're actively covering.
Michael Grinbaum, the New York Times reports on the Trump administration every day. Why did this specific story get under the president's skin?
It's a great question. I mean, of course, the Qatari jet is something that the president has been touting and speaking about for months now, and he was showing it off to reporters on that initial trip out to Ankara. The gilded interiors, some of the regal designs that were installed on the jet. And then, without really any explanation, he was asked to take or he chose to take the old Air Force One on his return trip. So when our reporting shows that the president was upset when the Times reported on the fact that there were some significant security concerns about the capabilities of this new jet, that Secret Service agents had actually urged him to take the old one simply as a matter of precaution for flying over European airspace. And my colleagues have reported that Kash Patel, the FBI director, actually went to the White House on Friday, spent about 8 hours there. And it's very, very unusual for an FBI director to be working on an investigation physically in that kind of proximity to the administration, to the White House and the West Wing. Traditionally, there's been a barrier between those two entities of the government.
Michael Grinbaum, I am told I need to let you go do more reporting. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday and bringing this to us. We appreciate you. Michael Feinberg, talk to me about just how unusual it is for the FBI director to be orchestrating something like this from inside the White House, to say nothing of the fact that the reporters who were subpoenaed are supposed to show up on court on the same exact day that Jay Clayton is supposed to have his confirmation hearing.
Yeah, look, I was just a humble executive at the FBI. I was not its director, but in my investigative judgment and experience, it's not necessarily a good idea to headquarters an investigation out of the very same building and office that probably contains most of your subject pool. I get it probably made Donald Trump happy to have Kash Patel running to and fro and looking busy on this matter, but you really, really don't want to be discussing an ongoing investigation in the building that houses many of the people who could have leaked the information that predicated your investigation. But putting the sarcasm aside, even though it's a legitimate, I do want to note one thing for the audience. The sort of shock and horror at the notion of the intelligence community or law enforcement trying to figure out who's been talking to reporters that we've seen exhibited in popular media and on today's show is emphatically not shared by the intelligence community and the law enforcement community. So the notion that you would subpoena reporters to talk about where they got state secrets we can debate whether that is a good or bad thing for democracy and whether the First Amendment in a non-prior restraint context prevents it from happening. But this is the sort of thing that national security investigators have been clamoring for largely since the time of the Pentagon Papers resulted in a lot of guidelines that prohibit them from otherwise doing this sort of thing. And they'd argue that the Pentagon Papers has been fundamentally misunderstood. So what looks like a huge controversy to the outside world is within the government, and I would say Democratic and Republican administrations, as something that may have been a long time coming. I'm not endorsing that worldview, just noting for our viewers that there is not going to be unanimity of opinion on this between the media and government investigators.
I'm just so struck, Peter Baker, by the fact that just a week ago we were sitting here talking about the fact that Senator Grassley wanted to know more from FBI Director Kash Patel about his own spending inside the FBI, his use of government resources. There were questions of, as there have been since Patel was confirmed, about how long he can stay in this post and how long the president would put up with his antics. I wonder how you square what we were talking about last week, Grassley's questions about Patel's tenure at the FBI, with the fact that Patel has been very happy to carry the president's water on this question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in Kash Patel's head, but I think you point out rightly that he felt, or at least possibly he felt, that he was on the edge and that he wants to show his loyalty to the president, taking on something the president considers to be a priority, which is, the retribution for reporters that are reporting things that he doesn't want to have reported out there. I would just add, by the way, in terms of the subject we're talking about here, it's not a huge surprise that a plane that was built for a luxury, travel donated by an Arab country is not able to be retrofitted to have the same kind of security apparatus that a plane that was built specifically for the commander-in-chief in the first place would. That's the Air Force One, the blue and white that every president has been flying now since Kennedy. These were designed specifically for a commander-in-chief to fly securely around the world, to be able to even run a war from midair if needed. And they were designed with that in mind from the minute they began putting a single rivet into a single bolt and all that stuff. This plane that he flew on, the one you're showing on the right with the red, white, and blue paint that he likes, that was donated by the country, by Qatar, was never built for that. And so they spent a year trying to retrofit it to that. But it's not surprising that they couldn't do the same things with that kind of plane after the fact that is done with a plane that's built for security in the first place. So they're trying to make this out to be some great national security, but every security expert would tell you that this was obvious from the beginning.